The stars had always called to humanity, and in the year 2247 they finally answered back. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his vessel, watching as the jump gate flickered to life before him. The horizon's edge moved forward through the swirling portal of light and energy, carrying humanity's hopes into a universe they had only dreamed about. When they emerged on the other side, they found themselves surrounded by ships from dozens of different worlds, each one representing a civilization that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. The Galactic Council had existed for over 2 million years, or so the records claimed. 47 different species worked together under a single government, maintaining peace and order across countless solar systems. The Council operated from a massive station called Nexus Prime, a structure so large it had its own gravity and atmosphere. Jake Morrison had never seen anything like it in his life, and he knew that humanity was about to step into something far bigger than they had imagined. Ambassador Lisa Caldwell took charge of the diplomatic efforts. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice, someone who had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. She presented humanity's achievements to the Council representatives, showing them art and music from Earth, explaining their scientific discoveries and philosophical traditions. The alien species listened with what seemed like genuine interest. Some of them appeared fascinated by human culture, while others remained distant and cautious. The Valorans controlled most of the Council's decision-making processes. They were beings made of living crystal, their bodies reflecting light in strange patterns that changed with their moods. Their leader was called High Arbiter Zenith Kale, a towering figure who had served the Council for over 3,000 years. When Zenith Kale spoke, every other species fell silent and listened. His voice carried an authority that came from centuries of experience and power. At first, everything seemed promising. The Council offered humanity limited trading rights and access to some of their technology. Human colonists began establishing settlements on worlds that the Council had marked as open for development. One of these worlds was called Haven's Rest, a beautiful planet with blue oceans and green forests that reminded the colonists of Earth. Over 5,000 humans made it their home, building cities and farms, creating a new life under alien skies. But problems emerged quickly. The Council had strict rules about expansion, about how fast a species could grow and where they could settle. Humanity's natural curiosity and rapid adaptation alarmed many of the older species. They watched as human colonies sprouted up across multiple systems, as human ships explored regions that had been ignored for millennia. The Council members began to whisper among themselves, discussing whether humanity posed a threat to the established order. The breaking point came when another species claimed Haven's Rest as their ancestral territory. The Drixani were an insect-like race who presented ancient maps showing that their ancestors had once lived on the planet, thousands of years before humans arrived. They demanded that the human colonists leave immediately. The colonists refused, arguing that the planet had been completely uninhabited when they landed, with no structures or settlements anywhere on its surface. Jake Morrison found himself caught in the middle of the dispute. His ship had been the first to survey Haven's Rest, and he knew beyond any doubt that no one had been living there. He testified before the Council, presenting his sensor data and orbital scans, but the Drexani insisted that their claim was valid under Protocol 7 of the Galactic Charter, a law that gave historical ownership rights to species who could prove their ancestors had once inhabited a world. The Council chambers erupted in debate. Some species supported humanity, arguing that empty worlds should belong to whoever settled them first. Others sided with the Drexani, claiming that ancient territorial claims must be honored above all else. High Arbiter Zenith Kale remained silent throughout the arguments, his crystalline face impossible to read. Lisa Caldwell fought for humanity with every diplomatic tool she possessed. She called in favors, made promises, and appealed to reason and fairness. But she soon realized that something else was happening behind the scenes. The older species on the Council had made their decision before the debate even began. They saw humanity not as a new partner, but as a potential threat, a species that was growing too fast and asking too many questions. When the verdict came, it struck like a hammer. High Arbiter Zenith Kale rose from his seat, his body flashing with cold blue light. His voice echoed through the chamber as he declared humanity a Category 5 threat to galactic stability. The words meant exile, total and complete. All human colonies outside the Sol system had to be abandoned within 1 standard year. Any human vessel found beyond the designated quarantine zone would be destroyed without warning or negotiation. Lisa Caldwell demanded to know what crime humanity had committed. Zenith Kale's answer chilled her to the bone. Humanity had committed no specific crime, he explained, but their very nature made them dangerous. They adapted too quickly, learned too fast, and refused to accept limitations. In the Council's 2 million years of history, they had seen species like this before, and every one of them had eventually caused chaos and destruction. Jake Morrison and Lisa Caldwell returned to Earth carrying the worst news in human history. The journey home felt longer than any voyage they had taken before. When they arrived at Earth orbit, they found representatives from every human government waiting for them. The message had already been transmitted ahead, and panic had begun to spread across human space. The evacuation of Haven's Rest became a tragedy. 5,000 colonists had to abandon everything they had built, leaving behind their homes and dreams. Some refused to go, choosing to stay and face whatever consequences came. Jake Morrison personally flew the last evacuation flight, watching through his view screen as the colony lights flickered out one by one. Then came the barrier. The Galactic Council deployed a quantum field around human space, creating an invisible wall that prevented any faster-than-light travel beyond a 20-light-year radius from Sol. Human ships that tried to break through simply stopped, their engines failing as they hit the barrier. Some crews died in the attempt, their vessels torn apart by forces they couldn't understand. Humanity found itself trapped in a cage made of quantum physics and alien technology. They had reached for the stars and been slapped down, declared too dangerous to exist among the civilized species of the galaxy. The exile was complete and the barrier was absolute. Earth and its closest colonies were all that remained of humanity's dream of exploring the cosmos. The anger and frustration that followed would change humanity forever, though no one knew it yet. The exile changed humanity in ways the Galactic Council never anticipated. Instead of accepting their fate and turning inward, humanity united like never before. The nations of Earth put aside their differences and formed a single government called the Terran Dominion. President Helen Cross stood before the combined assembly of Earth and delivered a speech that would be remembered for centuries. She spoke of cages and chains, of how the Council had not defeated humanity but simply given them a new challenge to overcome. Commander Ryan Blake received orders to lead Project Exodus, a secret military and scientific initiative with one goal: break through the quantum barrier. He was a career officer who had spent 20 years in space, someone who understood both the technical and human elements of the challenge ahead. The project was given unlimited resources and access to humanity's brightest minds. Every scientist, engineer, and researcher who wanted to contribute was welcomed into the program. Dr. Emma Price became the lead theoretical physicist for Project Exodus. She was young for such a position, barely 30 years old, but her understanding of quantum mechanics and space-time physics was unmatched. She had published papers on dimensional theory that most of her colleagues couldn't even understand. Now she had the opportunity to turn theory into reality, to find a way through or around the barrier that imprisoned her entire species. The early years were frustrating. Every attempt to breach the barrier failed. Human ships bounced off it like insects hitting a window. Some crews reported strange effects near the barrier, time distortions and sensor anomalies that made no sense. Dr. Price studied these reports obsessively, looking for patterns in the chaos. She began to suspect that the barrier wasn't just a wall but something more complex, a manipulation of space-time itself. While the scientists worked on the barrier problem, the rest of humanity transformed their civilization. The Dominion government initiated massive construction projects across the solar system. The moon became a fortress, its surface covered with weapons batteries and shield generators. Mars was terraformed at an accelerated pace with entire cities built underground to protect against potential attacks. New colonies appeared on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, each one designed to be self-sufficient and defensible. Earth's oceans became home to thousands of underwater habitats. Humanity had always been a surface-dwelling species, but the exile forced them to think differently about survival. The underwater cities were engineering marvels, capable of supporting millions of people in complete safety. If enemies came from the stars, they would find that humanity had learned to hide in places no one expected. The generation ship program represented humanity's backup plan. Massive vessels were constructed in orbital shipyards, each one capable of sustaining tens of thousands of people for centuries. These ships used conventional drives that could reach perhaps 10% of light speed, slow by galactic standards but sufficient for reaching nearby star systems over many decades. If the barrier could never be broken, humanity would at least have a way to spread beyond their cage, even if it took generations to do so. Commander Blake coordinated all these efforts while Dr. Price continued her research. 15 years passed with little progress on the barrier problem. Many people began to lose hope, accepting that humanity might be trapped forever. But Emma Price refused to give up. She spent countless nights in her laboratory, running simulations and testing theories that bordered on the impossible. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Dr. Price was studying the quantum foam that existed beneath normal space-time when she noticed something strange. There were gaps in the foam, tiny spaces where the laws of physics operated differently. She called these spaces subdimensional pockets, and she theorized that they connected to each other across vast distances. If she was right, then ships could potentially travel through these pockets, bypassing normal space entirely. Building a drive system based on this theory took another 5 years. The mathematics alone were incredibly complex, requiring new equations that Dr. Price had to invent from scratch. The engineering challenges were even worse. The drive had to open a gateway into subdimensional space, keep that gateway stable long enough for a ship to pass through, and then close it safely on the other side. Any mistake could tear the ship apart or strand it forever in a dimension where normal matter couldn't exist. Lieutenant Sophie Grant volunteered to pilot the first test vehicle. She was a skilled pilot with nerves of steel, someone who had flown combat missions against pirates in the outer colonies. The test vehicle was called Pathfinder 1, a small craft barely large enough for one person. It was equipped with the prototype subspace drive and enough sensors to record everything that happened during the test. The test took place far from Earth, out beyond Pluto's orbit where any accident wouldn't endanger populated areas. Commander Blake watched from the control ship as Sophie Grant powered up the subspace drive. The energy readings climbed higher and higher until suddenly the Pathfinder 1 simply disappeared. Not destroyed, not jumped away using conventional FTL, but genuinely vanished from normal space. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. The control ship's sensors showed nothing, no trace of the test vehicle anywhere. Then Pathfinder 1 reappeared exactly where it had vanished from. Sophie Grant's voice came through the comm system, excited and slightly breathless. She had done it. She had traveled through subdimensional space and emerged on the other side of the quantum barrier, spending just a few seconds in council space before returning through the same method. The data from her flight proved what Dr. Price had theorized. The barrier only existed in normal space. Subdimensional space was completely separate, operating under different rules. Ships using the new drive could pass through the barrier as if it didn't exist. Humanity finally had a way out of their cage. But Commander Blake and President Cross made a critical decision. They chose not to use the breakthrough immediately. Instead, they kept it secret and continued to build up humanity's capabilities. The Dominion wanted to be ready for whatever came next. They needed time to perfect the technology, to build ships that could use it reliably, and to prepare their civilization for contact with the galaxy again. Decades passed while humanity worked in secret. The subspace drive was installed on military vessels and scout ships. New weapons were developed, based on principles that the Council had never explored. Artificial intelligence systems were created that could think and react faster than any organic mind. Genetic modifications enhanced human capabilities, making soldiers stronger and scientists smarter. Every advance was focused on one goal: ensuring that when humanity returned to the galactic stage, no one would ever be able to exile them again. The young people growing up during this time knew only stories of the stars. They had never seen an alien face or walked on a world beyond their quarantine zone, but they were taught that someday humanity would return. They trained for that day, studying and preparing for a future that seemed impossibly distant. They became a generation defined by anticipation and determination, waiting for the moment when the cage would finally break open and humanity would step back into the galaxy. The year 2391 marked a century and a half since humanity's exile. 3 generations had grown up inside the quantum barrier, dreaming of stars they had never seen. Admiral Colin Hayes commanded the Defiant Dawn, the most advanced warship humanity had ever built. His vessel combined everything that humanity had learned during their isolation: subspace drives, quantum shields, artificial intelligence systems, and weapons that could tear through conventional defenses like paper. Lieutenant Maya Foster served as the intelligence officer aboard the Defiant Dawn. She was responsible for monitoring all signals that passed through the quantum barrier, looking for any information about what was happening in Council space. Most of the time, she picked up nothing but routine communications and commercial broadcasts. But one morning, she detected something different: military emergency codes and distress signals flooding through multiple channels. Maya brought her findings to Admiral Hayes immediately. The signals told a disturbing story. The Galactic Council was under attack by something called the Zirath, a machine civilization from beyond the edge of the galaxy. The Zirath had no interest in diplomacy or negotiation. They simply swept through system after system, destroying everything in their path. The Council forces were losing badly, their tactics and technology proving ineffective against an enemy that learned from every encounter. Admiral Hayes brought the intelligence to the Dominion Council, the governing body that had replaced the old Earth governments. Chancellor Victor Lang presided over the meeting where humanity's leaders debated what to do. Some argued that the Council's problems were not humanity's concern, that the species who had exiled them deserved whatever fate came their way. Others pointed out that if the Council fell, humanity would eventually face the Zirath alone, trapped inside their barrier with nowhere to run. The debate continued for days until a message came directly from Nexus Prime. High Arbiter Zenith Kale, the same crystalline being who had condemned humanity all those years ago, sent a personal transmission to Chancellor Lang. The message was brief and desperate. The Council was on the verge of collapse. Millions of beings faced extinction. The Council needed help, and they were asking humanity to provide it. Chancellor Lang called for a vote. The decision was close, but ultimately humanity chose to act. However, they would not go as beggars or servants. Chancellor Lang composed a response to Zenith Kale that laid out humanity's terms. They would help fight the Zirath, but in exchange, the exile must be formally ended. Full reparations must be paid for the damage done to human colonies, and humanity must be given a permanent seat on the Council with equal voting rights. The Council could accept these terms or face the Zirath alone. The response came within hours. The Council agreed to every condition. They had no choice, and both sides knew it. Admiral Hayes received orders to take the Dominion fleet into Council space. The fleet consisted of 5,000 ships, every one of them equipped with subspace drives and weapon systems that Council species had never seen before. When they emerged from subdimensional space at the edge of Council territory, every sensor in the region detected them simultaneously. The quantum barrier that had trapped humanity for so long was bypassed, as if it had never existed. The Dominion fleet moved through space with a coordination and precision that amazed the Council observers. Human ships flew in formations that seemed impossible, their movements synchronized down to the microsecond by artificial intelligence systems that thought faster than organic minds could follow. Admiral Hayes led the fleet toward Crystalline Prime, the Valoran homeworld. Intelligence reports indicated that the planet was under siege by a massive Zirath force. Billions of Valorans were trapped on the surface while drone swarms controlled the orbital space above. The remaining Council ships in the area were barely holding on, their shields failing and their weapons running low on power. The Defiant Dawn and its sister ships arrived in the middle of the battle. The Zirath drones detected the new arrivals and immediately adjusted their tactics. They were learning machines, capable of adapting to any threat they encountered, but they had never encountered anything like human warfare. The Dominion ships moved in ways that violated standard tactical doctrine, using maneuvers that seemed random, but were actually carefully calculated to create confusion and vulnerability. Lieutenant Maya Foster coordinated the electronic warfare efforts. The Zirath drones communicated with each other through quantum entanglement, a method that was supposed to be impossible to jam or intercept. But human scientists had been studying quantum communication for decades. Maya's systems flooded the Zirath network with false signals and contradictory orders, causing the drones to hesitate and make mistakes. The battle lasted for 6 hours. Dominion fighters, piloted by humans with neural implants that connected their minds directly to their ships, flew through the Zerath formations like sharks through water. The pilots thought and reacted faster than any biological being should be able to, their reflexes enhanced by technology and training. Zerath drones exploded by the thousands as human weapons found their targets with devastating accuracy. Admiral Hayes watched the battle from his command chair, issuing orders that were executed instantly by his crew and the fleet's AI systems. He felt something that surprised him. Not hatred for the Zerath, but respect for their capabilities. These machines were formidable opponents, perhaps the most dangerous enemy humanity had ever faced. But they were still just machines following programming and patterns. Humans could think outside those patterns, could do things that made no logical sense but worked anyway. When the last Zerath drone was destroyed, silence fell over the battlefield. The Dominion fleet had suffered losses, 17 ships damaged and 3 destroyed, but they had won. Crystalline Prime was safe. Admiral Hayes received a transmission request from the planet's surface. When he accepted it, High Arbiter Zenith Kale appeared on his screen. The ancient Valoran looked different than Admiral Hayes remembered from the historical records. The crystalline body that had once shone with authority now appeared dimmed and cracked. Zenith Kale spoke slowly, each word seeming to cost him effort. He thanked Admiral Hayes for saving his people, and asked if the humans would continue to help the Council against the Zerath threat. Admiral Hayes reminded Zenith Kale of the terms Chancellor Lang had set. The High Arbiter confirmed that the Council had already begun preparing the formal documents that would end the exile and grant humanity all the rights they had demanded. But there was something else, something Zenith Kale wanted to say personally. The old being's voice trembled as he admitted that exiling humanity had been a mistake, perhaps the greatest mistake the Council had ever made. For a moment, Admiral Hayes considered all the possible responses he could give. He thought about the anger and frustration that humanity had endured for a century and a half. He remembered the colonists who had been forced to abandon Haven's Rest, the researchers who had spent their lives trying to break through the quantum barrier, the children who had grown up never seeing the stars up close. But in the end he simply nodded and told Zenith Kale that mistakes could be forgiven if people learned from them. The Dominion fleet remained in Council space, helping to coordinate the defense against the Zerath invasion. More human ships arrived every day as the Dominion mobilized its full military strength. The Council species watched in amazement as humanity deployed weapons and tactics they had never imagined. Some of the older species began to understand why the Council had been so afraid of humanity all those years ago. These beings thought differently, acted differently, and refused to accept limitations that other species took for granted. Humanity was returning to the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same again. The war against the Zerath dragged on for 20 years. Every time the Council forces pushed the machines back, they adapted and returned stronger. General Kyle Sanders took command of the combined fleet operations, coordinating attacks that involved ships from dozens of different species. He discovered that each species had unique strengths that could be combined in unexpected ways. The crystalline Valorans could withstand tremendous energy weapons, while the aquatic Benthans had reaction times that surpassed even enhanced humans in certain situations. General Sanders developed tactics that used these strengths together. He placed Valoran heavy cruisers in positions where they could absorb enemy fire, while human strike craft attacked from unexpected angles. Benthan pilots flew reconnaissance missions that mapped Zerath positions with incredible precision. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Systems that had been lost were reclaimed. Zerath foundries were destroyed before they could build new drone armies. Dr. Emma Price, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, led a research team studying captured Zerath technology. Her protege, Dr. Nathan Clark, brought her a discovery that changed everything they thought they knew about the enemy. The Zerath weren't invaders seeking conquest. They were refugees running from something far worse. Deep in the memory cores of destroyed drones, Nathan found records of the Zerath home galaxy being consumed by what they called a reality cascade. The reality cascade was a phenomenon that defied easy explanation. It appeared to be a wave of increasing entropy that spread through space, unraveling the fundamental laws of physics in its wake. In regions touched by the cascade, atoms couldn't hold together. Energy couldn't flow in predictable ways, and matter itself became unstable. The Zerath had watched their entire galaxy die, system by system, as the cascade expanded outward from some unknown origin point. Dr. Price presented these findings to the Galactic Council. The reaction was mixed. Many species refused to believe that such a thing was possible. Others demanded to know why the Zerath hadn't simply asked for help instead of attacking. Dr. Clark explained that the machines had tried peaceful contact first, but the Council had rejected their requests for sanctuary. Desperate and dying, the Zerath had turned to force as their only option for survival. Ambassador Julia Stone, the granddaughter of the famous Lisa Caldwell, took on the challenge of negotiating peace with the Zerath. She was a skilled diplomat who had inherited her grandmother's talent for finding common ground between very different perspectives. She established communication with the Zerath Collective Intelligence, a distributed network of consciousness that spoke with many voices but thought with one mind. The negotiations took months. The Zerath were understandably suspicious of organic beings after being rejected by the Council. Julia convinced them that humanity understood what it meant to be cast out and desperate. She proposed a solution. The Zerath would cease all hostile actions, and in exchange the Council would help them find a way to stop the reality cascade. The machines agreed, though they were skeptical that any solution existed. But the cascade was coming. Advanced sensor arrays detected it moving through the void between galaxies, a wave of destruction heading directly toward the Milky Way. Scientists calculated that at its current speed, it would reach the outer edge of Council space in 500 years. That seemed like a long time, but on cosmic scales it was barely a moment. The galaxy had time to prepare, but not much. Dr. Price and Dr. Clark worked together on what they called Project Eternity. The concept was audacious. Build a network of massive generators at strategic points throughout the galaxy, creating a quantum stabilization field that would reinforce the laws of physics themselves. The technology required didn't exist yet. It would need advances in quantum mechanics, energy generation, and space-time manipulation that would take decades or even centuries to develop. Humanity proposed that the Council make Project Eternity the highest priority for every species in the galaxy. The Council, humbled by their mistakes with humanity and terrified of the approaching cascade, agreed without debate. They granted humanity leadership of the project, recognizing that human innovation and determination were exactly what the situation required. The Terran Dominion became the driving force behind the largest cooperative effort in galactic history. Captain Claire Bennett received orders to oversee construction of the first Eternity generator. The site was chosen at the very edge of the galaxy, where the cascade would arrive first. The generator needed to be enormous, drawing power from sources that could sustain it for millions of years. Engineers designed it around a captured black hole, using the immense gravity and energy to power quantum field projectors that would span light years. Construction of the first generator took 30 years. Hundreds of species contributed to the effort, each one bringing their unique expertise. The Valorans grew crystalline structures that could channel enormous amounts of energy. The Benthans designed cooling systems that could dissipate heat in the vacuum of space. Humans coordinated everything, their AI systems managing millions of individual tasks and keeping the entire project on schedule. When the first generator was finally complete, it was larger than some solar systems. The activation ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy. Dr. Price, now over 100 years old and kept alive by advanced medical technology, pressed the button that brought the generator online. The quantum field expanded outward at faster than light speeds, creating a bubble of reinforced space-time that pushed back against the approaching cascade. Long-range sensors confirmed what the scientists had hoped. The cascade slowed as it encountered the quantum field. The laws of physics became more stable in the protected region, resisting the entropy that tried to unravel them. But one generator wasn't enough. Calculations showed that the galaxy would need at least 200 generators, strategically placed to create an overlapping network of stabilization fields. Project Eternity transformed from a desperate gamble into a centuries-long commitment. The Galactic Council restructured itself into the Galactic Union, a more democratic organization where every species had an equal voice. The old hierarchies that had ruled for millions of years were dissolved. Species that had barely tolerated each other now worked side by side in orbital foundries and research stations, united by the common goal of survival. General Sanders retired from military service and became the administrator of the Eternity Project. He established construction schedules that would see a new generator completed every 7 years. Each one was a monumental undertaking, requiring resources and labor from across the galaxy. But the Union never wavered. Every species understood that their survival depended on completing the network before the cascade arrived. Humanity designed an artificial intelligence system called Genesis to coordinate the effort across time and space. Genesis was more sophisticated than any AI that had come before, capable of managing billions of construction tasks simultaneously, while also predicting problems years in advance. The system became the backbone of Project Eternity, ensuring that resources went where they were needed and that construction stayed on schedule. As the decades passed, more generators came online. Each one added to the protective field, creating a web of reinforced spacetime that grew stronger with every addition. The Zareth machines contributed their expertise, having learned more about the cascade than any organic species. They helped design the quantum projectors and power systems, their machine precision complementing organic creativity. The galaxy was changing in fundamental ways. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years found themselves working together toward a common goal. Old grudges were set aside, ancient conflicts forgotten in the face of extinction. The exile of humanity became a cautionary tale taught to every young being, about the dangers of fear and the importance of cooperation. What the Council had meant as punishment had forged humanity into exactly the kind of species the galaxy needed. 300 years had passed since humanity's return to the galaxy. The year was 2711, and the Galactic Union had grown into something that the old Council could never have imagined. Every species worked together not because they were forced to, but because they had learned that cooperation made them all stronger. The old hierarchies had dissolved completely, replaced by a system where contribution and merit determined influence rather than age or tradition. Admiral Jordan Pierce stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching as construction crews put the finishing touches on the 199th Eternity generator. He was the great-great-grandson of the famous Admiral Colin Hayes, and he carried that legacy with pride. The generator before him was a masterwork of engineering, a structure so vast that light took hours to travel from one end to the other. When activated, it would complete the network except for one final piece, the Master Nexus. The Master Nexus had to be placed at the exact center of the galaxy, anchored near the supermassive black hole called Sagittarius A. This location was not chosen randomly. Dr. Olivia Murphy, the greatest physicist of her generation, had proven mathematically that quantum stabilization fields worked best when anchored to points of extreme gravity. The Master Nexus would use the black hole's immense mass to create a field strong enough to protect the entire galaxy. Dr. Murphy had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. She was only 40 years old, but her understanding of quantum mechanics and space-time physics surpassed even what Dr. Emma Price had achieved in her prime. Olivia had grown up hearing stories about the exile, about how humanity had been trapped and how they had broken free. Those stories had inspired her to push the boundaries of what was possible, to find solutions that others said were impossible. The construction of the Master Nexus faced challenges that made all previous generators look simple by comparison. The gravitational forces near Sagittarius A were so intense that conventional ships couldn't survive. Matter was torn apart by tidal forces, time flowed at different rates depending on distance from the black hole, and radiation levels could kill unshielded crews in seconds. Every attempt to get close enough to begin construction ended in failure. Engineer Lucas Wright proposed a radical solution. He designed specialized vessels using subdimensional technology, descended from the original barrier-breaking drives that Dr. Emma Price had invented centuries ago. These new ships could partially phase out of normal space, reducing the effects of gravity and radiation while still remaining solid enough to manipulate physical materials. The technology was dangerous and unpredictable, but it was the only way to work near the black hole. The construction fleet ventured into the galactic core, a region where no organic being had ever survived for long. Lucas Wright personally led the mission, refusing to ask anyone to take risks he wouldn't accept himself. His ships phased in and out of normal space, appearing just long enough to place components before vanishing again. The work was slow and precise, with each piece having to be positioned with perfect accuracy. 50 years passed while the Master Nexus took shape. Multiple generations of workers came and went, children growing up in the construction fleet and taking their parents' places when they retired. The project became a way of life for thousands of beings from hundreds of different species. They worked together in the most hostile environment imaginable, bound by a common purpose that transcended individual survival. Finally, after half a century of constant effort, the Master Nexus was complete. It hung in space near Sagittarius A, a structure so complex that its full design was stored across millions of data cores. Unlike the other generators, the Master Nexus would do more than just stabilize spacetime. It would actively reinforce the quantum foundations of reality itself, making the laws of physics more resistant to entropy and decay. If everything worked as designed, the entire galaxy would become immune to the reality cascade for billions of years. The activation ceremony was planned for Unity Station, a massive space habitat built on the ruins of the old Nexus Prime. Representatives from every Union species gathered for the event, along with billions more watching through holographic projections. High Chancellor Amanda Silva, a human elected by unanimous vote of all member species, prepared to give the order that would determine the galaxy's fate. Chancellor Silva was a thoughtful leader who understood the weight of the moment. She had spent months preparing her speech, trying to find words that would capture what this achievement meant. But when the time came, she spoke simply and directly. She talked about fear and courage, about how the galaxy had been divided by suspicion and united by necessity. She reminded everyone that the generators they had built were not weapons or tools of control, but gifts to the future, a promise that life would continue. When she gave the order to activate, the 200 Eternity generators came online in sequence. The quantum field spread outward and overlapped, creating a web of stabilized spacetime that covered the entire galaxy. Energy readings climbed to levels that pushed the limits of what sensors could measure. Then the Master Nexus engaged, and everything changed. The galaxy blazed with light visible from neighboring galaxies. Every star seemed to shine brighter for a moment as the quantum stabilization field took hold. The effect was not just physical but fundamental. The laws of physics themselves became more rigid, more resistant to change. Entropy still existed. Stars would still die and black holes would still consume. But the underlying structure of reality was now protected against the kind of catastrophic unraveling that the cascade represented. Long range sensors tracked the reality cascade as it reached the galaxy's edge. The wave of destruction hit the quantum field and stopped completely. It could not progress, could not penetrate the reinforced spacetime that protected the Milky Way. More than that, the field began to push back. The cascade started to recede, its own destructive work being undone by the stabilization effect. Scientists calculated that within 1,000 years the cascade would dissipate entirely, its energy finally exhausted. High Arbiter Zenith Kale, kept alive for over 3,000 years through medical technology that bordered on the miraculous, approached Chancellor Silva during the celebration. The ancient Valoran moved slowly, his crystalline body worn down by centuries of existence. He had lived long enough to see the consequences of his own mistakes and the redemption that followed. Zenith Kyle spoke words that would be carved into monuments across 1,000 worlds. He told Chancellor Silva that the Council had tried to erase humanity from the stars, but instead humanity had saved them all. He said that humanity's dominion was not built on conquest or control, but on creation and cooperation. What they had built together would outlast empires and civilizations. It was a dominion that time itself could not erase. In the centuries that followed, humanity continued to explore and innovate. New species were discovered and welcomed into the Union, treated not with suspicion but with hope. The Eternity generators hummed at frequencies beyond normal hearing, maintaining the quantum fields that protected trillions of lives. Children from 100 different species grew up learning about the exile and return of humanity, understanding the lessons embedded in that history. The quantum barrier that had once imprisoned humanity was dismantled. Its components were recycled and incorporated into the final Eternity generator as a symbolic gesture. Where the cage had once existed, engineers built a monument visible from light years away. The inscription was written in every major galactic language, telling the story of how exile had led to unity, how desperation had led to hope, and how one small world had saved billions. Historians studied the events surrounding humanity's exile, trying to understand how such a mistake could have been made. They found that the old council had been paralyzed by tradition, unable to adapt to change because they had existed unchanged for so long. Fear of the new had made them reject what could have been their greatest ally. The lesson was clear. Diversity drives innovation and rigid thinking leads to stagnation. Humanity's dominion could not be measured in territory or military strength. It existed in the problems solved and the futures secured. It lived in the cooperation between species who had once been enemies, and in the technologies that protected against threats no single species could face alone. Most importantly, it survived in the belief that had sustained humanity through their darkest years. No barrier was truly unbreakable, no problem was truly unsolvable, and no species should ever face the darkness alone. The stars that had once rejected humanity now shone with the light of their greatest achievement. The galaxy was united and protected, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. And at the heart of it all was the truth that the Galactic Council had learned too late. Sometimes the greatest threats become the greatest saviors, and sometimes being different is exactly what the universe needs.